Do you believe that Tulsi Gabbard, a woman born in 1981 running for the position of Director of National Intelligence, took down some of the most formidable figures in the Democratic Party in a single talk show? No. Then stay with me, because what you're about to hear is a linguistic battle of epic proportions where beauty, righteousness, courage, and intelligence triumphed in the most spectacular way. You remember Tulsi Gabbard's historic Senate hearing, don't you? She stood before the United States Senate facing a barrage of scrutiny, sharp-tongued criticisms, and a ruthless establishment eager to eliminate her from the game of power. But instead of buckling under pressure, Tulsi stood her ground. She didn't just prove her competence, she turned the very attacks against her into boomerangs, making her adversaries look foolish before millions of American voters. And in the aftermath of that hearing, chaos erupted within the Democratic ranks. They lashed out, smeared her reputation, spun fabricated stories to weaken her standing, but strangely enough, the more they attacked, the brighter she shone in the hearts of patriotic Americans. She was no longer just a politician, she became a symbol, a warrior in a pristine white suit, radiating unshakable composure, her gaze as sharp as a hawk's yet as deep as a mountain lake, exuding intellect, resilience, and fearless conviction. But at the headquarters of MSNBC, in a tightly sealed conference room, a different kind of strategy was unfolding. A desperate, dirty scheme, one last attempt to destroy Tulsi Gabbard's credibility. MSNBC wanted to humiliate Tulsi, and they chose a talk show. They knew one thing: if they wanted to bring her down, they had to do it live on national television in front of millions of viewers. A carefully worded invitation. Television in front of millions of viewers, a carefully worded invitation was sent to Tulsi. A honey-laced trap disguised under the noble banner of fair political debate. And one crisp, golden morning, the letter arrived in T's hands. She glanced at it, then she smiled. The view wasn't enough for them. She knew what was happening. She knew they were afraid. They couldn't stand the fact that there was no one more qualified than her for the role of Director of National Intelligence, and they needed one last desperate ambush to turn the tide. What they didn't know was, they were walking straight into their own trap. February 2025. New York never sleeps, and tonight, neither does MSNBC. The headquarters of this media empire looms over the city like a fortress of influence. Its towering glass facade reflects the glow of streetlights below, a symbol of power and control. But inside, the air is thick, not with cigarette smoke, but with something far heavier. A war is being waged. On the top floor, a crisis meeting is underway. The conference room is starkly lit, bathed in the sterile glow of overhead LED panels. At the center, a long mahogany table is cluttered with confidential documents, half-empty coffee cups, and laptops flashing with incoming reports. Against the far wall, a row of massive screens plays an endless loop of Tulsi Gabbard's recent Senate hearing, each accompanied by sensationalist headlines: a Trump nominee, a threat to democracy. Tulsi Gabbard, Russia's chosen one. How do we stop her? No one speaks. They just watch. Their eyes, sharp, calculating, are locked onto the screens, dissecting, analyzing, plotting. At the head of the table, MSNBC's star anchor, Rachel Maddow, sits with her hands clasped, fingertips touching lightly in a posture of control. Her dark-rimmed glasses reflect the blue glow of the screens, her expression unreadable, except for the slight tension at the corners of her mouth. To her left, Adam Schiff leans back in his chair, a smirk creeping across his face. He has built his career on Russia collusion hoaxes, spinning fabricated narratives into political weapons, and tonight, he's here to orchestrate his latest hit job. Opposite him, Elizabeth Warren taps a pen against the table, a steady, rhythmic beat that betrays her impatience. The silence in the room is not due to hesitation. It is the calm before the storm, because they all know they only have one shot at taking down Tulsi Gabbard. Warren leans back, breaking the heavy silence. Shall we begin? Maddow nods. Tell me the plan. And just like that, the trap was set. The air inside the MSNBC production suite was charged with anticipation. Producers were stationed at their monitors, their fingers moving swiftly across keyboards, fine-tuning every second of the carefully orchestrated ambush that was about to unfold. On the big screens, clips from Tulsi Gabbard's Senate hearing were being re-edited, cutting out moments of her strongest rebuttals, isolating expressions that could be misconstrued as hesitation or uncertainty. This was no longer just an interview, it was a setup. Every camera angle had been calculated. Every question had been structured for maximum damage. Schiff and Warren weren't here for a debate. They were here to publicly dismantle Tulsi's credibility before she could cement her place in national security. Schiff watched the final cut of an attack segment, sipping his coffee. "This should be easy," he murmured. Warren glanced up from her notes, raising an eyebrow. "We just need to keep her off balance, make her defensive. The moment she stumbles, we take control." Schiff leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "The media's already on our side. We just need one crack in her composure. One. Once we have that, we'll control the narrative." For the next news cycle, producers nodded, adjusting their earpieces and confirming final edits. They had played this game 1,000 times before. They had taken down senators, governors, even presidential candidates. Tulsi was just another name to cross off the list. But as the doors to the green room opened, the energy in the studio shifted. A figure entered, composed, steady, unreadable. Tulsi Gabbard walked in wearing a tailored white suit, the same one from her Senate hearing, a deliberate choice. The last time she had worn it, she had dismantled an entire panel of adversaries with nothing but logic and precision. Today would be no different. She didn't need a staff or an entourage. She didn't bring stacks of notes or rehearsed talking points. She brought confidence and an unsettling level of control. Schiff's smirk faltered slightly. Warren's fingers stilled against her notepad. For a brief moment, the room felt different. They had expected a politician desperate to defend herself. Instead, they were facing a woman who wasn't here to plead her case. She was here to turn the entire script against them. And in that instant, before a single word was spoken, one thing became clear. MSNBC had just lost control of their own show. The MSNBC studio was bright but cold, staged for an execution. The glow of the lights was artificial, almost clinical, but underneath it was something raw, electric, a waiting storm. And then she entered. Tulsi Gabbard didn't rush, didn't slow. Every step was measured, controlled. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't arrogance. It was the kind of presence that forces people to watch. Her white suit cut through the field of dull grays and dark blues like a blade. It wasn't just an outfit, it was a statement. Clean, sharp, untouchable. The kind of white that didn't hide in shadows. The kind of white that demanded to be seen. That dared you to try and stain it. She didn't sit immediately, she studied them first. Adam Schiff sat forward, fingers laced together, that smirk twitching at the corner of his mouth. He wasn't a man who attacked head-on. No, he was a snake. Patient, coiled, waiting for his prey to misstep. Next to him, Elizabeth Warren was more restless, her grip on a stack of papers just a little too tight, her polite smile just a little too practiced. Unlike Schiff, she wasn't here to play the long game. She wanted a clean hit, one statement from Tulsi they could rip apart and feed to the media machine. MSNBC had set the board, the cameras, the lighting, the framing, the narrative preloaded and ready to fire. They weren't here for a debate. They were here to bury her. The host leaned forward, smoothing his tie, voice neutral, but too neutral, too polished. "Welcome to MSNBC Prime Time. Tonight, we discuss the qualifications for the role of Director of National Intelligence. Should a former congresswoman and military veteran be entrusted with one of the nation's most critical positions?" A question. Not quite. It was a loaded gun casually placed on the table. Tulsi didn't react. She settled into her chair slowly, her gaze sweeping across the room, assessing, calculating, not like a politician on trial but like a fighter stepping into the ring. Schiff struck first. "Ms. Gabbard," he began, voice smooth, rehearsed, "you've appeared on Russia Today, you've met with Bashar al-Assad. Can you explain to the American people why someone seeking to lead national intelligence would have these kinds of associations?" It was a haymaker thrown early. He expected hesitation, a stumble, a moment of scrambling. What he got was a woman who barely even blinked. Tulsi tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "That's an interesting question, Senator Schiff." Her voice was calm, measured, offense waiting for her opponent to overextend. "But let me ask you something. Barack Obama met with Raul Castro. Hillary Clinton met with Vladimir Putin. And you yourself have supported diplomatic engagement with China." The corners of Schiff's smirk twitched downward. "If simply meeting with a world leader makes me untrustworthy, then I suppose you'd also agree that President Obama, Secretary Clinton, and even yourself should be viewed with suspicion." A flicker of discomfort passed between Schiff and Warren, They hadn't expected her to flip the script so quickly. Warren recovered first. "No one here is saying diplomacy isn't important," she countered, adopting the practiced tone of a professor lecturing a student. "But you have openly criticized U.S. military actions. How can someone aspiring to lead our intelligence community afford to question national security policy?" Tulsi didn't rush her response. She let the question hang in the air, let the weight of it settle over the room. Then she leaned back slightly, fingers loosely intertwined, her expression unwavering. "Senator Warren," she said, her voice even, "I served in the United States military. I have seen my fellow soldiers die in combat." She let that sit for a moment. "Tell me, how many people in this room have actually stood on a battlefield wondering if today would be the day they wouldn't make it home?" The silence was instant. Schiff shifted in his seat. Warren's lips pressed together. "I don't question military policy because I hate America. I question it because I refuse to let another generation of young Americans be sent into wars that serve Washington politicians more than they serve the American people." There was no counter to that, not one that wouldn't make them look like frauds. The host leaned forward quickly, eager to pull the reins back. "Ms. Gabbard, are you suggesting that the government manipulates information?" His tone feigned disbelief, as if the very idea was preposterous. "That's a serious claim." Tulsi's gaze locked onto him. "I'm not saying the government manipulates information," she paused. She let them lean in, wait for it. "I'm saying MSNBC does." And just like that, the air changed, not just tension, shock. The host stiffened slightly. Schiff's jaw flexed. Warren's hand tensed over her notes. Tulsi simply sat back. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't scrambling. She was waiting. "Go ahead," she said, almost amused. "I've got time." They had set a trap, and now they were the ones struggling to get out of it. Schiff gripped the armrest of his chair, his fingers tightening almost imperceptibly. His face remained composed, but there was a flicker, just a flicker, of impatience beneath that carefully curated confidence. He wasn't used to having his narrative disrupted this early in the game. Warren wasn't faring much better. She was accustomed to controlling conversations, drowning opponents in long-winded speeches, not being forced to scramble for a response. This wasn't just another political debate. This was a battle of wits, and Tulsi wasn't prey. Schiff forced a thin smile, recalibrating. "Ms. Gabbard," he said, his voice measured, "you've referred to the Democratic Party as a rigged operation. You've publicly criticized the very administration you once served. Have you turned your back on the principles you once stood for?" A calculated strike. He wanted to put Tulsi on the defensive, to force her to justify herself, to give MSNBC a soundbite. Tomorrow's headlines were already being drafted. In their minds, Tulsi Gabbard, traitor or opportunist, was already being drafted. But Schiff had underestimated one thing: Tulsi Gabbard was not easily controlled. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unshaken. "Senator Schiff," she said, her voice calm yet undeniably sharp, "your question genuinely confuses me." Schiff blinked, just for a second. "I always thought turning your back on principles meant saying one thing and doing another, like when a politician spends years preaching about integrity only to fabricate stories to deceive the American people." Sound familiar? The air in the studio shifted. Schiff didn't move, but there was the faintest tension in his jaw. Tulsi didn't pause. "If you're so concerned about loyalty, let's talk about the fact that you spent years pushing the Russia collusion hoax, claiming you had undeniable evidence, yet when asked to provide it, you had nothing." Schiff's fingers twitched slightly. Tulsi gave a slight, almost amused smirk. "So, if questioning foreign policy makes me a Russian asset, then maybe you should ask yourself, who exactly were you working for when you spent years feeding the American public a blatant lie?" Warren drummed her fingers on the table, as if debating whether to intervene or let Schiff handle himself. Schiff wasn't about to let go that easily. He shook his head slightly, forcing a chuckle, then moved on. "Ms. Gabbard," he said, his voice measured, "if we're talking about transparency, let's discuss the foreign groups that have donated to your campaign." A well-placed trap. He knew MSNBC would clip out her rebuttal, push only the question, and let social media run wild with it. But Tulsi wasn't rattled. She exhaled lightly, as if deciding just how much patience she was willing to extend, Then she struck. "Senator Schiff," she said, her gaze. Schiff said nothing. "If we really want to talk about political contributions," Tulsi continued, "let's discuss the millions of dollars you've taken from defense contractors, the same ones who profit off the wars you so passionately support." A flicker crossed Schiff's eyes. Tulsi leaned forward slightly, her voice still even. "So instead of questioning my campaign, why don't you tell us, how much money have you made sending young Americans to fight in endless wars?" Warren cut in immediately, her voice strained with forced neutrality. "This isn't about him," she said, trying to yank the discussion back onto MSNBC's preferred track. "This is about you and what you stand for." Tulsi arched an eyebrow, barely concealing her amusement. "You're right, Senator Warren," she said, her voice steady. "And what I stand for is the truth." The MSNBC host swallowed. Schiff shifted in his seat. Warren straightened up. Tulsi did nothing. She simply sat there, composed, unwavering. And in that moment, no one else had anything left to say. Warren was done waiting. Schiff had fallen apart. But she wasn't about to let the same thing happen to her. "Let's talk about the real issue here," Warren started, her voice strong, firm, and laced with righteous indignation. "The Trump administration left America's economy in ruins. The CFPB, the very agency created to protect consumers, was dismantled, while billionaires like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos profited off an unregulated market. And who paid the price? Hard-working American families." She paused for dramatic effect, then turned to Tulsi with a sharp look. "You claim to stand with the people, but I see you defending the ultra-wealthy, the ones siphoning off this country's resources. So, tell me, Congresswoman, who do you really stand with?" MSNBC leaned in. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. They expected Tulsi to waver, to stammer, to fumble, but she didn't. Instead, she folded her arms, tilting her head slightly as if studying Warren from a higher vantage point. "Senator Warren," she said, her voice smooth, deliberate, and laced with sarcasm, "I truly admire how you paint this picture, a world where the government is the hero and anyone questioning them is the villain." Warren squinted slightly. "But let's talk about reality. Under Biden, the top 10% of wealthiest Americans have gained $6.5 trillion, while working families have lost $3.7 trillion due to inflation and tax hikes. If we're talking about who's siphoning off this country's resources, let's start there." Rachel Maddow jumped in immediately. "Congresswoman Gabbard, are you saying the Biden administration is solely responsible for our economic instability?" Tulsi turned to face him, a faint smirk forming. "No," she said. "I'm saying that's exactly what they don't want you to believe." The room was dead silent. But Warren wasn't done. She leaned forward, pushing for the final blow. "If you're so concerned about financial transparency," Warren pressed, "let's talk about FEMA. The Trump administration cut emergency relief funds while FEMA had to spend $59 million providing aid for immigrants. Do you support that, Congresswoman?" Rachel Maddow nodded, doubling down. "Congresswoman Gabbard, these people aren't criminals, they're just seeking a better life." This was a perfect trap. If Tulsi defended Trump's immigration policy, MSNBC would brand her as heartless. If she criticized FEMA's spending, they'd call her anti-humanitarian. But Tulsi wasn't walking into theirs. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze piercing. "Senator Warren," she said slowly, "you just described this as helping immigrants seeking a better life? Let me ask you something, who's actually paying for that?" Warren blinked but didn't answer right away. Tulsi rested both hands on the table, her voice steady but sharp. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It was created to respond to national disasters. But just this year, over $59 million in taxpayer dollars were used to provide housing and services for illegal immigrants, while families in Louisiana, Florida, and California are still waiting for disaster relief. Rachel Maddow cut in immediately. "Congresswoman Gabbard, are you saying the Biden administration misused FEMA funds?" Tulsi locked eyes with him, unshaken. "I'm saying disaster relief funds have been politicized." The room felt stifling. Rachel Maddow scrambled to change the subject. He shifted the attack. "Congresswoman Gabbard, you've openly supported Elon Musk, a billionaire who has cut off key financial channels in American politics. Are you suggesting that government regulation isn't necessary for economic stability? This was a loaded strike. If Tulsi defended Musk, they'd brand her as an elitist siding with the rich. If she criticized Musk, they'd call her a hypocrite. But Tulsi wasn't playing their game. She leaned back slightly, crossing her arms. I support Elon Musk for one simple reason. Rachel Maddow leaned in, sensing an opportunity to pounce. Tulsi smirked. Because he scares you. The air in the room shifted. Schiff sat up straighter, his eyes narrowing. Warren blinked rapidly. Rachel Maddow adjusted in his seat. Scares us, he repeated. Tulsi's smile remained, but her eyes gleamed with something sharper. Let's be honest, she said. You're not attacking Elon Musk because he's a billionaire. You're attacking him because he's not one of you. Yours. Schiff tensed. Because he owns Twitter, she continued, or because he's exposing Washington's dirty money? Rachel Maddow opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Tulsi leaned forward just slightly, her voice low but unwavering. The real question is, who's actually pulling the strings in this country? No one answered. Schiff looked down at the table. Warren turned away. Rachel Maddow had lost control of the conversation, and at that moment, Tulsi wasn't just winning, she was in complete control. Schiff was like a man on a sinking boat, desperately bailing out water with a broken bucket. That smug, ever-present smirk of his was gone. In its place was a twisted grimace, a tight, forced expression that barely concealed his growing panic. Beads of sweat had started to form at his hairline, but he didn't dare wipe them away because that would be admitting just how cornered he really was. He had spent his entire career manipulating narratives, bending reality to fit his agenda. But this time, he wasn't in control. This wasn't some closed-door hearing where he could drone on with pre-rehearsed sound bites, drowning out opposition with sheer volume. This was live television, and Tulsi was no ordinary opponent. Beside him, Warren looked like she had just swallowed curdled milk. That earlier bravado, the huffing, the puffing, the smug righteousness, was all gone. She had been shut down on every front, economic policy, FEMA funding, even Musk. She had nowhere left to run. That left Schiff, and Schiff wasn't going down quietly. He suddenly shifted his feet backward, as if preparing to bolt from danger, his voice rising just a little too sharply, enough for the audience to sense the tension creeping into his polished persona. I am so sick of this Iraq War hero act, he snapped, his voice edged with frustration. You're just playing the victim. He exhaled sharply. Through his nose, his temper broke through the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. The truth is, you have no experience to lead the DNI. You think serving in the military automatically makes you qualified to run national intelligence. The words landed like a soggy firecracker, loud, messy, and completely underwhelming. Tulsi just stared at him. Not blinking, not shifting, not even registering the attack. She simply watched as Schiff floundered, struggling to wring out the last few drops of credibility he had left. And then she spoke. Let me get this straight, Senator Schiff. Her voice was slow, steady, precise, each word a calculated strike, a bullet hitting dead center. You're saying that I, a United States Army officer, a combat veteran who served in Iraq, a former member of the House Armed Services Committee, am not qualified to lead? She tilted her head slightly, eyes like sharpened steel. But you, a man who has spent his entire career fabricating intelligence reports from the comfort of an air-conditioned office, are? Boom. Schiff froze. It was like watching a bomb go off in slow motion. Warren let out an involuntary breath, the kind you release when you witness a train wreck happening right before your eyes. Rachel Maddow tightened his jaw, his earpiece buzzing with frantic voices from producers scrambling to salvage the segment. And then, the audience erupted in applause. Not just polite claps. Not just scattered approval. A full-blown standing ovation from MSNBC's own hand-picked audience, from the very people they thought they had under control. Tulsi didn't even flinch. She just tilted her head slightly, watching as Schiff twisted in his chair, hands clenching, desperately searching for a comeback. But there was nothing left to say. It was over. The so-called interrogation had just turned into Schiff's public undoing. The mastermind of intelligence policy had just been exposed, dismantled, and obliterated in under 10 seconds. The moment the show ended, the aftershocks began. There was no need to wait until the next morning. MSNBC felt the consequences immediately. The control room erupted into chaos. Producers barked frantic orders into their headsets. Editors scrambled to draft damage control narratives. But deep down, they all knew there was no salvaging this disaster. Social media exploded. Twitter was flooded with clips of Tulsi dismantling Schiff, leaving Warren speechless, and rendering the MSNBC host completely powerless. Images of Schiff sweating, Warren fumbling, and the MSNBC moderator desperately trying to change the subject spread like wildfire. Hashtags like hashtag Tulsi owns MSNBC, hashtag Schiff destroyed, and hashtag Warren exposed shot to the top of the trending list in mere hours. Conservative media wasted no time. Headlines blared across major outlets: Tulsi Gabbard annihilates MSNBC on live TV, Schiff and Warren humiliated in brutal debate. MSNBC sets a trap and falls into it, but the real shock came when even some neutral outlets couldn't ignore what had happened. There was no spinning this. Millions had witnessed it firsthand. Tulsi Gabbard had utterly dominated. Meanwhile, left-wing commentators scrambled to contain the fallout, but no explanation could erase what America had just seen. Inside the Democratic Party, Schiff and Warren fell silent. The show was never mentioned again. Not a single think piece from the usual left-wing columnists dared to address the disaster. That night, MSNBC made a calculated decision to pretend it never happened. There were no analysis segments, no political pundits spinning excuses, no post-mortem discussions. Just silence. They had thrown everything at her. They believed they could crush a single person with the weight of their collective power. They thought they could dictate the truth simply by controlling the media narrative. But they had underestimated Tulsi Gabbard. They had forgotten that truth is not something you can manufacture. They had forgotten that justice does not side with those who shout the loudest, but with those who stand unwavering in its defense. As the final studio lights dimmed, a stagehand accidentally adjusted a spotlight, casting a perfect halo over Tulsi's seat. For a fleeting moment, she wasn't just a politician. She wasn't just a former soldier. She was a warrior, and in that moment, all of America understood. Tulsi Gabbard hadn't just won a debate, she had cemented her place in history. The question now isn't whether Tulsi Gabbard can handle the truth, it's whether Washington can handle her. Do you think Tulsi Gabbard deserves to become the Director of National Intelligence, DNI? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more hard-hitting political takedowns. The battle for truth is far from over, and we're just getting started.